2025 brought about a new series of risks. So our understanding of what risks we had before were mostly around retaliatory investigations, illegal subsidies to Airbus, digital services taxes, etc. But in the second administration, the second Trump administration, we understood he came with a new way of doing things. The idea, first of all, of a broad universal tariff. This hadn't really been considered. Even 6 to 12 months prior to Trump winning the election, the idea that we would see a tariff on effectively every product imported into the United States, it really wasn't considered.
Welcome to the Wine to Wine Vinitaly Business Forum 2025 Chicago edition, where global wine professionals share insights, strategies, and inspiration from this year's conference. Let's dive into today's session and explore the ideas shaping the future of wine.
Alrighty, we're going to start. Whoever is here is here. So our next speaker hardly needs an introduction for anyone who follows the U.S. wine trade landscape. Ben Aneff is one of the most influential voices in American wine importing and trade policy. He's the president of the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance and managing partner of Tribeca Wine Merchants in New York. How many of you are familiar with U.S. Trade Wine Alliance? How does it work? And then maybe you can tell us how it works to become a member and whatnot. Ben has been a leading advocate in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the global wine community, especially during turbulent years in the U.S. like now, U.S.-EU tariffs especially. His efforts have been instrumental in shaping how policymakers understand the economic and cultural impact of imported wines on the U.S. market. Today, Ben will share his insights in a session entitled Navigating Tariff Turbulence, Strategies for Italian Wine Producers Amid U.S.-Italy Trade Shifts. So you can get started and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. Okay?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you being here today. I'm speaking about one of the less uplifting and fun parts of probably Vinitaly and Wine to Wine, but we're here because we live in the world that we live in and not the world we hope to live in, and here we are. So right now, as you may have noticed, we're in a difficult time frame. I think as of today, the US dollar is down about 15%. Likewise, we have roughly 15% tariffs on European wines. There is no exception at the moment, so most of our cost bases are up 30%. And just so we get a little recap of where we had been, tariffs are new, but we had 40 or 50 years in the United States with no tariffs whatsoever on wine. And it felt like a real luxury. You had effectively a 25 cent duty on every bottle, but nothing that would impact consumer demand in any way. And then 2019 happened. And to take you back in time, 2019 had the WTO Airbus results. So this is a case launched during the Bush administration. We finally got a ruling from the World Trade Organization that effectively said the European Union was subsidizing Airbus illegally, and they awarded the United States the ability to put tariffs on a huge range of products, including wine, for about $8 billion a year. There was a subsequent case involving illegal subsidies to Boeing as well, and right now those tariffs have been paused. But in round one, this is the first time we'd seen tariffs, in the modern era anyway. October of 2019, a 25% tariff was instituted on most still wine from France, Spain, Austria, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Round two, there was a threat of 100% tariff on sparkling wine from France as a result of digital services taxes that we may see threaten us once again. In round three, after the election, we saw an increase or an expanse of the tariffs to include more products, such as wines of different formats and alcohol levels. For instance, initially, tariffs were only on 750 milliliter bottles and products under 14% alcohol. Those tariffs were all paused in March of 2021, and after that time frame, US businesses had paid $239 million in tariffs. 2025 brought about a new series of risks. So our understanding of what risks we had before were mostly around retaliatory investigations, illegal subsidies to Airbus, digital services taxes, etc. But in the second administration, the second Trump administration, we understood he came with a new way of doing things. The idea, first of all, of a broad universal tariff. This hadn't really been considered. Even 6 to 12 months prior to Trump winning the election, the idea that we would see a tariff on effectively every product imported into the United States, it really wasn't considered. And then you started to hear the term reciprocal tariff. And a reciprocal tariff, the idea is that other countries have higher tariff rates than the United States, and so the fair thing to do to bring about what they call fair trade rather than free trade is to put in reciprocal tariffs that would balance out the tariff rates between the US and the countries that we import from. And then you had the famous April 2nd Liberation Day, for lack of a better term. This was the announcement of reciprocal tariffs. Now, interestingly, the actual applied tariff rate difference between the United States and the European Union is 1.5%. It was announced at 20%. Problematic. On April 9th, we saw the sort of pause happen and negotiation after negotiation after negotiation. On September 5, 2025, the US and the EU announced an initial deal, for lack of a better term. And it is deal in sort of the vaguest way. There's no expansive contract that's been signed. It's, for lack of a better way to say it, the back of a napkin. This is what we plan to do. This is what we'll agree in principle to do. And that set the broad tariff rate on products from the European Union, including all Italian wine, at 15%. Importantly, the EU and the United States have both agreed that they're going to continue to work towards expanding the list of products that are excluded from tariffs. So there are certain products that have been excluded. Now, what's really important for the wine industry and really important for Italian producers is that wine continue to stay at the top of that list. And right now, the European Union has said that wine and spirits together, not separated, but together, is at the top of their list for a future exclusion. And the US and the EU are working towards expanding that list of products that would be excluded. Now, don't get me wrong, the US is going to have asks for that. If the European Union wants more products excluded from tariffs, if they want wine and spirits excluded from tariffs, the European Union is going to have to give. They're going to have to come to the United States with something in hand. Like it or not, the US believes there are certain products that the EU is very protectionist with, particularly broader agriculture. If you think things like pork, beef, chicken, dairy, etc., the US believes European farmers are incredibly protectionist. They don't allow fair access from US producers to the European Union, and there's a good degree to which wine is used as a cudgel to influence other areas of trade, whether we like it or not. So I also think it's important that we understand, in the context of these broad tariffs, what our future tariff rate or tariff risks might be. So let's say we get wine excluded from this reciprocal tariff issue. Soon, meaning May, June of next year, the pause on the Airbus EU tariffs will come about. So the Trump administration will have to choose whether to keep that pause going or potentially to put another product list together and threaten tariffs as a part of the Airbus issue once again. If that happens, it doesn't mean wine would snap back, but it does mean that there would be a published comment list. The US would propose effectively $8 billion worth of products. Think the mall of European products. It's an incredible mall. I mean, there's fashion goods, there's wine, there's cheese, there's balsamico, there's Chanel and Fendi, there's Airbus, there's loads and loads of products from the European mall. And the US is going to choose $8 billion worth of those products to put a tariff on. So our job in that instance is to tell the United States government that putting tariffs on wine is the least effective way to bring about a behavior change from the European Union, because wine adds a huge economic value to small businesses all over the United States. For every dollar we spend in Europe on a bottle of wine, American businesses make $4.52. The economics here are incredible. We import $5.2 billion worth of wine from Europe. From that, American businesses generate $23 billion. That $23 billion goes to 200,000 importer and distributor jobs. It goes to hundreds of thousands of restaurants and the 47,500 independently owned retail stores like May. We also have what we call retaliation threats. Anytime President Trump has threatened tariffs on, let's say, Section 232 national security issues, any country that has said, if you do this, we're going to retaliate against U.S. products, Trump always raises the bar. You saw that time and time again. You've also seen, different products being used as a bargaining chip for sort of any number of issues, whether it's in Brazil, where tariffs are being used to try to influence a judicial case. The list sort of goes on and on. And then, the other risk I'd say is, the unknown unknown, the thing that we're not really thinking of. I don't think in January anyone thought we'd have a tariff on products from Canada. That wasn't on anybody's bingo card. But there's an element of uncertainty here that is different than past administrations. So what are the consequences of this? Well, the reality is, if you look at it in an antiseptic way, the dollar's down 15 points. A tariff adds another 15 points. You have a 30% addition of cost. So the elasticity rate in wine is 0.66. If we do nothing, that should mean a decrease in wine spend by roughly 20%, 19.8%, I think. Now again, the key factor here is if we do nothing. If businesses, producers change nothing. For importers and distributors also, it puts them in financial stress. It reduces their orders, it increases their broad risk. For retailers, we have supply uncertainty. Are we going to get rosé? Are we going to get Sancerre when we need it? Do we know we're going to be able to fill customer orders in time for Christmas? For restaurants, they're going to feel the same as a retailer does. You're also going to see a lot of price resistance from customers and margin erosion. And the ability for small businesses to absorb these tariff costs is going to be limited because most of these businesses are small margin. We work with great restaurants, and some of them will tell the story that, out of $1, at the end of the year, they'll get to take home a penny. $1, they take home 1 penny. But on a great wine program, they can make a 5x margin. But it's not a luxury for them. It's an absolute requirement that they make high margins because they're subsidizing the rest of their business. They have incredibly high costs of real estate, incredibly high costs of labor. Their food costs are going up. And the reality is it's very difficult for them to increase prices to consumers. US consumers have been in an inflationary period for several years, and they simply won't absorb any more price increases. And then when we push that to a consumer, it's simple. A higher price leads to reduced overall demand, less purchases. And one of my bigger concerns going on would be that this reduced demand from higher prices simply compounds these sort of broader demand shocks or concerns that we all have, whether it's convincing, showing the next generation how to love and enjoy wine, whether it's, the risk from substitute products, and I don't mean, California wine for Italian wine, I mean new consumers not drinking wine in the first place, using some other kind of product. Those things are concerning. And so I think it's something that, we need to look at clearly, but we also have to realize these are the results that happen, I think, if we do nothing. The Ceritas paribus is the word they used, all things being equal. So it's our job in the wine industry to make sure we move as reality moves. Tariffs are really unpredictable, and we do what we can to mitigate them, but what you can control is you can control your strategy in a market, and you can control your advocacy. For Italian producers, there are 2 really key things I think that you can do, and you have a particularly powerful voice. First, you have an incredible heritage, an incredible lineage that US consumers have fallen in love with. Your ability to have control over your business strength and your customer loyalty is second to very few. I'd also encourage all of you to be involved. Italian producers have a real advantage that I'll get to in just a moment that producers in France and Germany really don't. And I think that you can, if you lean into it, there's something that can really be done. So building loyalty in the US market, right now, any time of difficulty, I think we build muscles that will serve us in the fat times, but that we really need in the lean times. We've been in a 5 or 6 year period of really high growth. In the last year, I think businesses have been really surprised that you can't raise prices ad infinitum, and we don't see the wine market go up 7.5% every single year, but that's where we are now. So now more than ever, I think it's a back to basics time for wine producers. And as you sort of see, our business is a willingness to pay business. You need to convince customers to buy your product, not because of a price point, but because of their loyalty to your product. And you need to know your customer. The best way to build loyalty is to know them. Producers need to travel. You need to meet your customers. And your customers mean your end user customers, your importers, your retailers, your restaurants, and you need to understand your business in a way I think that we haven't necessarily before. And you've got to differentiate your story. What makes your business, what makes your wine different than your competitors, different from another product? If you had 5 minutes with me as a retailer or as a consumer to tell me why I should buy your wine, I'd love to know what I'd sort of call the hook. What's the hook? And I think we sort of all inherently know that when we hear it. What defines your wine? What defines your winery? And it's something that you need to be able to articulate to you, both your importer and distributor customers, your retailers need to know it, and then your end users need to know it. At a time like this, I do think there's always a real risk of trying to cut costs. The problem here is the wine world is not going to win in a race to the bottom. Consumers right now are demanding quality. They want reliability, they want consistency, they want great wine from great producers with a terrific story. I think everyone here knows that, less expensive than bulk wine is, commodity wine is having a harder time every day. The more you can ensure that the consistency of your wine stays for every consumer, and it also means you've got to be consistent with your supply chain, making sure that if you've developed a really great market in Chicago or you have a great series of stores in New Jersey that carry it, that they don't lose the consumers that have gotten used to buying your product. I think it's really important. And from our own consumers, I can tell you what really matters is experiential marketing. They want to know you. They want to know wine producers. They want to taste their wine in a setting where they can relate to them. They want to know you as people. They want to know the story behind your brands. The producers that come to the States, that do collaborations with restaurants, that say hello, that open their doors to visitors, far outperform those who don't. I do think, in this era, it's easy to be a little bit downtrodden, but I have never seen more young people incredibly passionate about great wine. I'm sure the broad numbers are going to show that young people aren't quite drinking as much as they had, but the number of people under 30 that come into my store that are incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly passionate is something I've never seen. I think a piece of that is, the barrier to entry, it wasn't really cost, it was knowledge. And it's easier to get past that barrier to entry now than it ever has been. The ability for someone that lives anywhere in the United States to go down a rabbit hole of knowledge and get obsessed with something has never been higher. And I see more young people that are obsessed with wine than I ever have been before. I know that isn't necessarily reflective of the broader market, but I will say those wines that scratch that itch outperform by orders of magnitude. Again, I think we're really in a time frame where we don't want to compete on price. I hear so often people talk about how we're going to absorb this tariff, which may be important, but the reality is we're in an era of premiumization. Every single consumer I know wants to buy great wine from a great story. Italian wines particularly can always lean on this authentic heritage. When we're talking about tariffs, one of the first questions people always ask is, won't they buy a California wine or a Washington wine or an Oregon wine? They won't if it's not fungible. And that means if you lean on that thing that separates you and that differentiates you, your incredible heritage and the terroir, the things that make Italy special, there isn't a wine in the world that can compete with that. When I want a Barolo, I want a Barolo. And when we lean on that authenticity, it plays a huge role. One of the things I believe personally in a digital world, I see more people that want community. They're seeking it out. This is one of the incredible strengths that wine has. I think the ability to engage with your customers and to build a community around your wine has never been higher. I think people seek it out. I think it's one of the reasons why young people, at least in New York, I see really wanting to engage on a really specific and high level with wine because they want to build that community, they want to find something, and they want to engage with you. And lastly, from a business perspective, really deep partnerships knowing intimately the members of your supply chain, from your importer to your distributor to your retailer, understanding the problems that they need to be solved, understanding how your wine fits into their market, understanding what makes a wine successful in one store and not in another, understanding the types of work that people do that does catch on, it can be incredibly powerful. These are the types of things that I think can mitigate what is legitimately a really challenging era. If we think of it from a really antiseptic perspective, a 30% increase is a 19.8% decrease in demand. It sounds terrible, but the reality is each and every one of us has something that we can do to mitigate that from a business perspective. And I do think that those types of things, they're muscles that we didn't necessarily flex when the wine market went up by 10% every year automatically. They'll serve us really well going forward. And then the very last thing that I think is really incredibly important is advocacy and policy engagement. In the United States, the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance works really hard to tell the story of how important European wine is to huge numbers of small businesses all around the country. It's a powerful and an effective step. The other side of this coin is it's very important that Europe advocate for themselves. Typically, wineries don't think they have a voice. They think countries care more about large industry than they do about the wine world. And that may have been true, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it can be changed when you actually start to raise your hand and ask to be listened to. I'll also say Italy in particular could be the single biggest advocate for an exclusion for wine. Your Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is perhaps Trump's best friend in Europe, one of the only people that President Trump actively respects and, more importantly, enjoys. At some point, the European Union is going to need to come hat in hand to the president, because let's make no mistake, the president will make this decision. The European Union will come hat in hand and ask for an exclusion. And there is no better person to ask for that exclusion than Giorgia Meloni. Italian producers have the capacity to put pressure on their political leadership and ensure that they do everything that they can to put wine at the very top of that list. It's incredibly important. Remember, effectively everything from the EU has been tariffed. Every industry is going to be gunning to be at the top of that list. Moreover, the asks of the United States won't be popular. So if the wine industry in Europe doesn't advocate for itself in an effective way, it will make the work much harder here in the United States. I'm hopeful that soon we'll get back to an equilibrium where we have free trade for all wine. But right now, I think it's responsible for us all to say, what can I do to mitigate this or lessen a potential negative outcome each and every day? Thanks so much. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
So just one quick question, because we don't have very much time. It's actually already time, but you're also a retailer, right? So you kind of, flew over the concept that when the 30%, the 15% additional percent, because we had Virtelato on the panel yesterday, and he said the real trouble hasn't really begun, because up till now, between the importers and the producer, they absorb the difference, right?
That's exactly right. Well,
Yes.
the other reality is you have a huge lag behind when the tariffs are put in place and when
Yeah.
they actually hit retailers and restaurants. In states like New York, for instance, you have to post-date 30 days before you can start selling. So even once a container hits New York, you still often will have 30 days before a retailer starts buying it or a restaurant starts buying it.
So if you put on your hat, the retailer hat, for 1 nanosecond, what is going to happen when the importers will raise their price onto, the retail price?
It depends on the wine. You're already seeing it in the new drops of Champagne and in Burgundy. And now what you're seeing is loads of importers and distributors aren't pre-buying. They're asking their retailers what they would like to pre-order. They're giving you a price sheet that is absolutely 30% higher than it was 1 year ago, without a doubt. And importers and distributors, they're going to lower their risk by not carrying inventory that they don't have pre-committed.
Okay, very good. Alrighty, quick question.
When you said that you noticed that you have people coming into your store that were under 30, and very interested, very excited about wine. I'm just curious in like what kind of terms are they talking? Because the most stereotypical thing with Americans are that it's very varietal driven, right? I want a glass of Pinot Grigio or I'm looking for a bottle of Cab. When they come in, are they speaking in different terms? Are they telling you like what they're going to eat with it or the place?
It's a great question. I mean, I'll be transparent. Like we have a small fine wine store in New York City, one store, but the ability of folks who are interested in wine to learn about wine and be obsessed with it has never been higher. And I do see more young people who know more than they ever have before. But they're engaging with producers and first of all, they'll come in knowing what producers they want in a way they wouldn't have 5 or 10 years ago. And who are they asking for? They're asking for producers that are either being visited by people on social media or producers who they themselves are active on social media. I mean, social media is an incredibly powerful tool, as everybody knows, and it has changed the wine industry. You know, there was an anecdote I heard not long ago. Your ability to know that the top 5 most influential people in any given field and learn from them has never been higher. Pick a subject, ask ChatGPT who the 5 most influential people are on Twitter, and read what they said. You can learn about it. Instagram does the same thing for wine. You will very quickly be told who the most influential drinkers are. You will very quickly be told what they are drinking, and you'll see it in real time. The downside of that for all of us in the industry, I hate to say it, I'm going to tell you, there used to be secret wines that only people in the industry knew. And we would all say to ourselves, you know what, I can't afford to bring Lafite to this, but I'm going to bring X, and everybody's going to be thrilled. Well, unfortunately, everyone knows what X is now. There are no secrets anymore. That's what social media has done. It is easier, you know, that barrier to entry on knowledge was never really cost. We thought it was cost, but it was time. And social media has ended that. Your ability to quickly see what the most influential people, the most knowledgeable people are drinking in any given day is almost instantaneous now.
One more question. Thank you for whatever you've said so far. I agree with you. How would you fight that big Walt Disney kind of touring of Napa that you have? I mean, Napa is the Walt Disney for grown-ups. What should the Italian market do to contrast it?
What should the Italian market do to contrast with Napa?
And I'm really happy about this wine-to-wine and this event because definitely, you know, we bring a lot of attention to the Italian wines.
I think it's a great question. I mean, I would say Napa tried to emulate Tuscany. That's what happened. Now, you have a little bit of a reverse in that, and Napa knew immediately how powerful it was to have a personal relationship with a consumer. That's the genius of Robert Mondavi and the genius of Napa Valley. I mean, they make world-class wine, absolutely. But they were opening their doors to consumers and developing loyal customers for 40 years. And for a very long time, it was incredibly difficult to do that if you were not a member of the trade. Tuscany's much better at that than they were. I think every wine region can be better, can continue to improve on that. Welcoming, you know, when a consumer from the United States gets on a plane and flies to your country and says, I really want to learn about your products, I'd open the door. Like, you have met someone who's passionate, they're telling you, I want to be your customer. And that's how you build a lifelong customer too. You know, someone that has visited you, and let's be real, like, what does wine do? It builds community. You open a wine, do you drink a wine by yourself? No, you drink a wine in company with others, and you build relationships. And I know so many people who've been fortunate to do that, you know, on wine trips, and those people become lifelong wine consumers. And by the way, it's something none of the other products that, you know, I hear are competing with wine. RTDs aren't doing that. Cannabis drinks aren't doing that. This idea of community is something that wine that is intrinsic with wine. I mean, in the first miracle, it's at a wedding. The whole point is to open and enjoy it with people. And from a business perspective, it builds brand loyalty like absolutely nothing. And none of our competitors can do it. And doing it in a beautiful place like Italy, tough to beat.
Sorry, just a follow-up comment on that, because I think it's a fascinating question about how to avoid the Disneylandification in tourism. Coming from the Hong Kong market, which because of our wine boom there became really, really spoiled, and people stopped going to dinners unless the winemaker or the owner or somebody who had a real stake in the winery was there. And what I see in California and other parts of the US where wine tourism has been invested in a lot is you have a tasting room manager, and that's their whole job, and they don't necessarily have a deeper insight into what's happening in the winery. So I do think what I see is still happening in a lot of parts of Italy that I think are doing it well is they have people who are leading the tours who are also working in the field sometimes, or they're also sometimes working in the winery. So they really can deliver insights. You're absolutely right. People are much more knowledgeable than they ever were, and they don't want a canned presentation. They want to hear from the people who are really doing the thing.
It's a great point. And I'm so sorry, I couldn't quite hear the Disneyfication piece from your comment. It's a great point, though. It's one of the problems with California. I think that lack of authenticity you see, the fact that if I go visit a winery in California, I'm probably visiting, a tasting room attendant who's 21 years old. I'm almost certainly not speaking with a winery owner. There's pros and cons, and there's a moment where you've leaned into a business that has helped you a tremendous amount, and maybe you've gone like one step too far. The whole point here is, your ability as a producer to have a personal relationship with your customer is incredibly powerful. But shutting your door to a customer is fairly close to having, the 15th assistant, PR person, giving a tour to someone. And then I think it's exactly right. What you have sold is not loyalty to a wine producer that you're going to be buying for the next 20 years. It's you sold an afternoon at $27 a glass. And I don't think that's what any of us want.
Okay, let's give it up for Ben Aneff, the president of U.S. Wine Trade Alliance. Thank you so much, Ben. I know you're a busy man. Thank you for popping by.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.